Today, I'm going to be speaking to someone who is touching on one of the biggest topics of all time, which is where does spirituality fit into my life? Where does it fit in as it relates to fulfillment and happiness? And she is doing some really cool things about it and some cutting edge research. So I hope you really enjoy this one. Hey, everybody. I'm here with best-selling author of Fulfilled: How the Science of Spirituality Can Help You Live a Happier, More Meaningful Life. Yes, please to that. She's a Stanford and Yale-educated psychiatrist and executive coach. She's clinical faculty at the Yale Medical School. She works with top CEOs, Olympians, A-list actors and actresses. And the coolest thing ever, starting the first spirituality and mental health center at Yale. Please welcome Dr. Anna Yusim. And thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Nick. It's a pleasure to be here.
So yeah, I have to tell you, in doing a little bit of research about you, I read that you have been to over 70 countries. You've studied Buddhist meditation, Kabbalah, you visited shamans and gurus, and it sounds like that was all in a search for trying to figure out what was missing in your life. And I'd love to understand, prior to beginning that quest, what were you chasing? What was driving you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And for me, the chase has always been for fulfillment. And what is fulfillment? Fulfillment, I believe, is a combination of multiple things, but two things in particular. One is that everyday feeling of joy that we feel in our hearts that we know when we are happy. And that's one part of it. The other part is the joy that comes from knowing that you're living a meaningful life and living the life that you're going to be proud of and in line with your values, principles. So a meaningful life. So basically happiness and meaning together. That's what I have always been chasing and continue to chase now. All that being said, it's important to realize that happiness and meaning change over time. They're dynamic concepts. So that which was happiness inducing and meaningful before may not be now. And now I'm chasing the same things in theory, but in very different ways.
How did that show up as? I mean, you've really chased after some big things. Again, I mean, becoming a psychiatrist, going to these incredible schools. Did you feel the void when you were younger, or did you believe that achieving that stuff was going to make you happy?
Yeah, I think that that's what we are all led to believe, right? And there's so much positive affirmation from society, from our families, from friends when we are achieving and doing those things considered meaningful and purposeful by society, right? And so you move forward with that. And actually, for me, I get a great deal of fulfillment by being of service through my profession. I love the work I do. And every day I wake up, thanking the universe with a ton of gratitude for being able to do precisely this kind of work. But now let's look more broadly, right? In my book, I write a lot about our addictions and how there's many different kinds of addictions. We think about addictions usually in terms of drug and alcohol addictions, sometimes behavioral addictions like shopping addictions or sex addictions or things of that nature, iPhone addictions. But then there's this third category, which is a little bit more tenuous and subtle, and that's psychological addictions. And that's addictions to things like achievement, power, status, money, and those things we believe we need to have more of in society. And oftentimes you get tons of affirmation, go for it, do more of this, have more money, have more of this, have more of that. And those are all wonderful things to go for and to chase in your life and are often necessary precursors for happiness, meaning, and fulfillment. But the problem is you become quite unhappy when those addictions become to run your life, begin to run your life. And when the more of them that you have, the emptier you feel. That's when you know that your psychological addictions have taken hold. So that did happen to me at one point. I was achieving and achieving and achieving, but at the root, I wasn't feeling fulfilled. And then I had to do an about face and really look at my life and find out what is missing. What do I need to do to shift things in order to really start to feel fulfilled, to have more meaning, to stop achieving for the sake of achieving for everybody else and start figuring out what my own soul needs and what I need to do at the deepest level to enable myself to be happy and fulfilled.
Can you paint a picture of that exact moment when you stared into the void on the other side of all these achievements and went, this isn't enough? there's something like there is this quest I need to go on. What was that moment? Can you be detailed about that?
Yeah, it was a few different things because I think that for me, it was just a buildup over time. And I do remember in my 88th Street Manhattan apartment, I'm waking up after an overnight call. It's like 4 p.m. Slept from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Wake up and worked really hard, loving my work, but something feels off. And I'm achieving more. I'm writing these papers. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. And at the root, there's something that is empty and I feel a void and I don't know what to do with it. And I'm like, I need to really shift something because according to all external markers of success, I seem to have it all. I have a job I love and I'm working, at the time I'd actually broken up from a 5 year relationship, but I was dating people and I was healthy. I had amazing parents. I had incredible friends. I should be really happy, but I'm actually feeling quite exhausted. But it was like a meaninglessness. It was something deeper for me. And I started wondering, what is it? How do you fill that void? For me, it was a whole journey. And it's interesting. There's this spiritual principle. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. For me, the answer to my void, that void, there's been many voids in my life where I felt this, right? And so in that particular moment, that void that I needed to seek and that the next several years would lead me to seek out was spirituality. And it manifested in a very interesting way. As I was dating people, I met this one person who I felt a very deep connection with. And we dated for a while. And then things just didn't work out. And in my mind, I was like, I really haven't felt this level of connection before. And I, in my mind, had this concept of, it feels like a very deep soul connection. And this idea of soulmate and soul connection led me then to start researching and thinking and understanding soulmates and even deeper, the concept of a soul. Having gone to Stanford, Yale Medical School, you're not really taught about the soul. In a way, as a psychiatrist, I'm a doctor of the soul, but you're not taught about how do you treat the soul in medical school. You're taught to treat the mind and the body. But it was at my soul level that I felt this emptiness, not at the level of mind and body. I was running every day. I was being healthy. My mind, seemed to be on track, but it was like a deeper emptiness. And so it was actually then that I started on this path that you alluded to, which took me to ashrams in India, learning Buddhist meditation in Thailand, studying Kabbalah in Israel, working with different shamans in South America, South Africa, in order to then understand how do these people feel fulfilled in their lives? And here I am doing everything according to Western medicine and getting my training as a psychiatrist, but I can't seem to fill my own void. And that's how spirituality entered my life and how I started to understand that spirituality often is a really important part of who we are and how we can be fulfilled.
So I'll tell you the resistance that comes up for me right now is one of my greatest fears was I just finished the surrender experiment with Michael Singer. And I hear him talking about this like I have humble life living in this little house. I didn't need a lot. I just wanted to be on my little property and ends up building this, almost billion-dollar, well, multi-billion-dollar company. And I hear that and what comes up for me is do I really want to heal myself? Do I really want to have that spiritual connectedness? What if I lose my drive and my motivation and my ambitions and then I end up just living in a hut somewhere because that's enough for me? And I'm curious to hear a frame on that. Like how do high achievers process this reality of like, I've used my negativity and my fear and my anxiety as a way to build. If I take that away and I'm suddenly at peace with myself and the world, can I still have that drive?
I believe that absolutely you could have the drive, and the drive will come from a different place. It'll be a drive coming from your soul as opposed to coming more from your mind. That's number one. That's my first answer. My second one is usually what leads us to transform is a pain point. And it sounds as though what you're talking about, Nick, is this perception of, wow, someone else did it in a really interesting way. And their pain or who they are led them to do it like this. And they are very spiritual and they live in a forest. And you know what? As of now, at least, I'm trying that on for size and it's not fitting. That doesn't feel like me. And that's okay. It's fun to try on other people's lives and principles and ideals on for size. But if it's not you, it's not you. And oftentimes, Michael Singer, in his book, I don't think it was necessarily pain that led him to shift. It was actually starting a very deep meditation practice, that then led him to shed off layers and layers of the accoutrements of success in society, right? All of the material things. And that's how he ended up in the woods. And that was his story. But I think for you, it's find your joy, find your, like, whatever it is that fills you up. And so, and I would, then ask you the question, what would be your motivation to go in that direction? I mean, you certainly don't need to. There's nothing that, necessitates that if that's not your soul's calling.
Yeah, I think that's always the whole dichotomy is I I've said this on prior podcasts too, is that I've generally created from darkness, that it was like, I don't feel like enough or I don't feel happy. So like the art that I create was generally like dark, right? It was like, oh, I'm sad, I'm disconnected. The idea of creating from a place of light and abundance is so interesting. And in business, people would always say to me things like, look, you can totally try to be a lotto winner, right? You can take a crazy win, like make the $1 billion gamble, build a unicorn, but it's statistically improbable. Or you could try to do what works. And I think what, just from the framing of your book, this idea of the science of spirituality, I'm really curious to know more about what applications, like, well, first of all, what is the science of spirituality? I'd love to understand that better because I'm like, spirituality is such like this amorphous term. And when you boil it down to a scientific approach, I'm curious how that lands for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just want to comment. I love what you're saying about creating from light versus darkness. That's such a great dichotomy. And I feel like creativity is really the voice of our soul, right? Intuition and creativity. That is how our creativity comes. And sometimes it'll come from light, sometimes from darkness. Sometimes there'll be deep emotions behind it. And sometimes it'll be just an intuitive knowing and boom, there is your $1 billion idea or $1 million idea right there. And so, in terms of how that connects to the science of spirituality, um, so my definition of spirituality is a connection to something greater than oneself, whether that be for you, God, whether that be the universe, whether that be a set of transcendent values like hope, trust, perseverance, or whether that be a collective consciousness. For everybody, it's something different. And whatever your something greater is, that something greater can infuse you with creativity, intuition, knowledge, energy, and can be a source of guidance in your life, right? And that guidance can come internally through intuition, or it can come externally through synchronicities and through the guiding forces in life, the little coincidences, miracles, etc., that open your eyes and give you a little bit of a nudge. Go this way and not that way. Right. And so that's spirituality. Now, the science of it is really looking at all the empirical studies that validate how certain beliefs and practices within the spiritual sphere actually help people to heal. And there's a ton of data on this. Now, the two places in medicine where a spiritually based model is the medical standard of care is actually addiction treatment. So, AA 12-step programs are inherently God based models. There's also agnostic AA, but oftentimes it's about giving over the problem. And then the other part is palliative care. So, when people are transitioning within medicine, spirituality enters. That's, you can have all sorts of chaplains and, individuals that are part of the care in many more ways than in the rest of medicine. Now, the science of spirituality, the reason that I'm so interested in it is just like you said, it's a paradox. Science is looking for that which is reproducible, observable, that we can touch with our hands and see with our eyes and create double blind controlled trials to study. Spirituality is often the exact opposite, something that's deeply personal, transcendent, introspective, very, very internal. And so the science of spirituality is such a paradox, and yet more and more centers through psychedelics and non psychedelics are trying to understand what it is about spirituality that helps people to heal and, even more importantly, sometimes live happier and more fulfilled lives.
And you open up some big stuff there. So we'll hold on the psychedelics one for a second because I know that that's just an explosion right now, and there's a lot on the topic. Um, I'm really trying to suss out a few things from what you're saying around this concept of science and spirituality, and specifically, again, mentioning that you are launching this spirituality and mental health center. I'll tell you a little bit about my journey. So I grew up Catholic and became an angry Catholic, and then became an angry atheist, and then became a tepid agnostic, and then had a moment where someone gave me a book that was about like reincarnation or something, and just the possibility of spirituality exploded. And my rational mind still judges that part of me that's like, I don't know, this makes sense. There is something that makes sense beyond myself emotionally and somatically, but not in my rational mind. And so there is this like self-doubting internal polarization. But what I've noticed is the more that I've prescribed to the idea that there is something beyond me, the more I've felt happy and open to joy. And I am curious to know more about this connection and what you've found through the work you've done between spirituality and people's mental health states.
Yeah. I love how you're describing it, and thank you for sharing your journey from angry Catholic to angry atheist to tepid agnostic and, and onwards. And it sounds like you are a bona fide seeker. And that's so beautiful. And that you have sought in many different ways and had many different conclusions that you've come to and tried on many identities in your own quest to understand spirituality and, of course, to understand yourself. And I love what you're sharing about how opening yourself to the possibility of something greater, whatever that is, actually was compatible in your own life with more joy, more fulfillment. And that's often, the case for that. It's been shown that individuals who um, go to church recover from heart attacks faster, things like that. People who have a belief in God are more likely to have enlightenment experiences with addiction and less likely to have, you know, heavy drinking days in a week, things like that. They have measured it down to that level of granularity and precision. There's something really, really profound about being open to that. And it's whether it's an openness to God or the divine coming through you and therefore enabling you to be happy, or just more approaching life with an open mindedness that then opens you up to all sorts of experiences that you otherwise would be closed to, right? Because you would think that, first of all, an angry Catholic versus an open minded, whatever, agnostic, atheist, not Catholic, but just an angry person versus a non-angry person. Probably the non-angry person is going to be much happier, rationally speaking. And I also get what you're saying about the rational mind at times getting in the way of belief. And I think that that's exactly the crux. I suffer from that myself, often, many times, because sometimes things don't make sense. And I often feel my mind getting in the way of things and trying to control things and trying to hold on to things and having a lot of time letting go, surrendering when things aren't going my way. And when I know that the right path is surrender. I know it's actually the only path. And yet there's this part of me that's trying so hard to control. So I feel like this is like within human nature, part of our struggle is to live within these two worlds, to live in this three-dimensional rational world, and also to be able to touch, when we are lucky enough, this higher realm, this self where we're able to open up to joy in the way that you've experienced.
So in what you've studied, have you found that the work you've done or the work that you're doing can help someone change the narrative around the world is happening to me versus the world is happening for me? Because I think that's the piece that, as a reformed control freak who's practicing surrender, hence the book that I read, I think that there was always this idea, if I'm not controlling it, I'm screwed. The world's not out for me. No one's here to help me. There is no one, there's no benevolent God that's going to make sure that this is all in service of me. Two, I think more lately, I'm like, actually, maybe there is some divine intelligence that actually knows what's best for me. And I'm like a child, an unevolved child who just doesn't realize that I shouldn't touch the hot stove. And so I'm throwing a tantrum.
I
So
love
I
it.
am
I
curious to
love it.
like, has that come out in the work that you've done? If you help people rewire that fear or fundamental belief?
I love your question. First of all, I personally so relate to what you're saying because I feel like that's been my exact journey as well. And absolutely, we're talking about victim mentality, right? And so many of us are like can succumb to victim mentality or something outside of us happening to us. And then we become victims of circumstances. And entitlement is another form of victim mentality when we feel entitled to something, anything. And it's a challenging thing because on one hand, we would like for everybody to feel entitled to clean water, healthy food, health care, a minimum standard of, safety and that's entitlement that's actually good. It's basic human rights. But then there's another level of entitlement. The world owes me something that can be very, very undermining to our own sense of self, our identity, and certainly to our joy. Entitlement actually is one of the most disempowering mentalities because when we have entitlement, we feel like when we get something, we deserved it. So we're not grateful. And when we
Mm.
don't get it, we feel like we should have gotten it and we get mad at the world. So the only emotion that can come from entitlement is anger and then lack of gratitude, even when you have something beautiful happen. So I work in my own life, I've overcome some of this stuff with, not financial entitlement, but other entitlements. And I've had many patients, financially and otherwise, who I've had to help work through entitlement. It's a very difficult mentality to shake. And on the other side, though, of victim mentality, when you can start to take responsibility for your own life, it has to be very much a conscious choice, not us being the petulant children and saying, the universe is doing bad things to me. God has abandoned me. The world sucks. Though we all can have those thoughts and feelings at times, and that's very human. But getting to the other side and saying, here's where I'm at. How do I accept my current reality, whether I like it or not? How do I process my suffering emotionally and otherwise? And then what steps do I take to start to live the life I love and to enjoy all of the amazing things in my life that I can be grateful for and actually start to feel the gratitude? That's happiness. And I think in general, whenever you're grappling with something like that, there's two parts. One is removing the darkness, and the other part is bringing in the light. So in this
Mm.
case, removing the darkness is identifying victim mentality, where it came from, what beliefs we have about the world owing us something, or us, I deserve this or I deserve that, or self comparison, like starting to remove the stuff that's holding you back, like to let go of those beliefs, emotions, feelings, actions that are not serving you, and getting to the other side and starting to bring in the things that are serving you. So, accountability, inspired action, faith, forgiveness, and owning your personal power and figuring out the degree to which you own your personal power. And then, if you bring faith, that's also a choice because not everyone brings in faith. You can live a perfectly good life without bringing faith into the picture. But if you do, then you're starting to work with, the divine, a little magic in your life, letting go, surrendering, and starting to pull in all the things that come from that. It's another way to think about it. It's like two ways of manifesting. One way of manifesting is the masculine way. I want this. I'm going to go out. I'm going to make it happen. So you go, that's how you've manifested the majority of your stuff. That's
Yeah.
the powerful masculine way. And many of us, men and women, have manifested in that way. The feminine way of manifesting is very different. You set an intention. It's almost like you feel it in your heart. You feel the emotions of having it and you draw that in. The masculine is getting, the feminine is receiving. You receive from the universe and you put yourself in a receptive stance in order to get what you need to get or get what you desire, knowing full well you don't have full control, that like you are co-creating together with the universe. You have your intentions, you have your heart that you are spinning to draw in what you want. And at the same time, there is a higher power that's helping to guide this whole process too, that's often bigger than you. And you might get something much bigger than you imagine, or a little different than you imagine, which is actually really, really good for you.
There's so much in what you said. Again, like, I feel like I could talk to you for hours, but, like, there's a few things that really bubble up to the surface for me, which is, how do I act as an optimist in this world, knowing that I'm not actually expecting to get anything that I want? Like, how can I be positive and just say, it's okay if I get none of it? But I know some people that wake up and they're like, I need to believe today's going to be amazing or I'm not going to feel happy. And yet the world owes me nothing. Oof, I don't know how to reconcile those two things.
Totally. Nick, you're speaking my language. Like I so relate to everything you're saying. I felt all those feelings. Like I grapple with all those questions myself. You're like such a kindred spirit. So optimism, let's talk a little bit about optimism. So optimism is a chosen mentality. It's choosing to see the world in a certain way. Now, when you look at the optimist versus the realist, there's actually a lot of studies on this. The realist has a more positive, a more accurate view of reality as to how much control they have. The optimist, however, who overstates how much control they have in the world, actually fares better in life than the realist. So it behooves
Wow.
us in many ways to be optimists. And I was just sending my friend, Dr. Brad Rosen, who's a lipidologist and a longevity specialist, some articles about this very question because he asked me, what kinds of studies are there to actually show that optimism improves your physical well being? And there's studies that Optimism improves recovery from cardiac illness. It improves the majority of health outcomes. Your mentality, your thoughts control a lot, or they impact a lot, your attitudes, but they don't impact everything. You can't just think yourself out of high cholesterol. You have to take concerted, inspired action to do whatever you need to do to change your life. But having the right mentality certainly will make you happier and to help you get there.
That broke my brain. Like, it's so interesting because I'm like, I've worked so hard. I had a friend that was he's a very successful entrepreneur, and he always used to say to me, "Nick, you need to go to business school," which I'm not. I'm like one of those hacks that like force my way into the family business. But he said the reason people should go to business school is to like basically get to the endless pursuit of reality, like to understanding what's real, and that a really good business person is not living in dream and fantasy and wishful thinking. I am a wishful thinking person. I am this optimist, but I've often been so disappointed by the fact that my dreams and my hopes were bigger than the reality that played out. Yet I'm not jaded yet. At least I don't think I am. And I keep playing for that. And I'm like, actually, life's pretty awesome in the macro. In the micro, it's really hard, which confuses everyone around me. They're like, Nick, it's weird. You're like a happy person about your life, but in your day to day, you throw tantrums, you're frustrated, you'll verbalize your annoyances. But I'm like, actually, I'm really grateful for the way my life has played out.
Absolutely. And, at the very start, we talked about those two things that create happiness, right? Or fulfillment, how you feel in the present moment, and then your overall assessment of your life, which is more a cognitive construct
Right.
of your overall happiness or contentment with your life. So the emotion of being happy versus the contentment with your life. Your contentment with your life, given your choices and where you're at, is high. And you're probably an emotional person that goes up and down in life and can throw tantrums and can be upset and overjoyed and sounds like a normal human to me. And so the question then is, how does all that actually impact or play out in terms of manifesting or creating the life you want? And that's really an interesting question for self-observation. Does do the ups and downs of emotion, do they help you to bring in what you want? Maybe that's just how you process in the world. And maybe the negative parts of emotion is you releasing what needs to be released and having your cathartic emotional experiences to then open you up for the joy. Some people are just like this, and there's other people who are a lot more like this, and it's a different life. And they can be equally content, but they're going to be much more like this. So I think it's also accepting the parts of you that sometimes because it sounds like there's self-judgment here. Maybe self-judgment or other people even saying, Nick, you seem to be going up and down. What's up? Your life's so good. Why are you, making mountains out of a mountain, whatever that saying is. It's a mountain moat. And so, um, but then at the end of the day, if you feel that the negative emotions and those dips are actually undermining you and your capacity for happiness, then we look towards some Stoic philosophy and we think about what is the proper way to evaluate a situation and to use your emotions in the service of yourself to take the proper action. And could those deep emotions, especially indulgences and negative emotions, actually be undermining you, not just undermining your capacity to manifest what you want in the world, but perhaps doing that by keeping you from being able to be your full expansive self because the negativity can contract you so much. So, this is something I grapple with myself in my own life, but also struggle with patients. You don't want to suppress negativity. You don't want to push away all the negative feelings because what you resist persists and what you don't own owns you. You want to allow yourself to feel all the totality of life's feelings, but you then don't want to indulge. If you go
Mm.
low, which we all do, we want to be able to set some boundaries around that because we can go so low sometimes that you can make decisions you regret. You can kind of fall into that dark space and spend a lot of energy and effort in that space. And it's an opportunity cost. There's so much you could be doing with that time, energy, and effort. Now, I also want to go back to something else you said that was really important about the darkness and those dark emotions, that a lot of creativity comes from that. And that's exactly right. Some of the best poetry, the best novels, the best movies come from people in those places seeking to make meaning of their own life and experiences. And I think that that's a very constructive way, and it's something very constructive that you could do with difficult emotions is to channel them in the service of creativity. So to keep creating, you're feeling down. Okay, let yourself feel your emotion. Now what? Then what do you do? What are the positive inspired actions you can take? And how do you create from that space? Especially, like you said, if that's how you've created, if that's been one of your tools for creativity, beautiful, use it. Use it as that. And then maybe over time, as you continue, you'll also start creating from that place of light. And you'll answer that question for yourself. Is the creativity as good, as fruitful? Do I then just become a Zen Buddhist sitting in a mountaintop meditating and be completely non productive and bored? Or maybe that's okay. Maybe that's where the universe will one day get me. And by then, I'll have all the resources I need to be able to be a happy Buddhist on a mountaintop.
Yeah, that scares me. When I have any thought that I may become that, I think I sabotage the potential of it because I'm like, I don't. Me today is terrified by that. I'm sure in that moment it's self-fulfilling. I'm like, if I'm here and I'm happy, who cares? But given that you've worked with so many incredibly high achievers and you are also a high achiever, what are some of the more predominant patterns that play out for the high achiever that the average person couldn't understand? Where it's like, because I think I've been villainized, and I've even villainized other high achievers, and I'm wondering what might be some lessons for other high achievers to hear that's like, oh, this is where you're going to hit a wall most likely.
Yeah. I think the first thing that comes to mind is how often high achievement correlates with self hatred. It's very interesting because in order to achieve, so many of us are taught over time that your value as a person, as an individual, as a scholar, as an athlete, as a business person, as an entrepreneur, as a founder depends on your success or this external thing that you have created. That it's almost like a commodity. And you expect and perform at a very, very high level. And high performance reaps great rewards in your life. And you have a lot of positive emotions affiliated with that. But you're human. And once in a blue moon, you fall short. So the difficulty with high achievers when they fall short, whether because of their own mistakes or because life throws you a curveball or because people could be difficult to work with, whatever the cause, they can sometimes have a much, much greater fall than an average person who's able just to see that sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, sometimes you fail, sometimes you succeed. People who aren't used to failure, failure hurts that much more. And then you start to blame yourself, and then you go into patterns of self hatred. So I have a lot of people with whom we work through that and being able to have the confidence to bounce back from that. And that is with positive self talk, with a little bit of reality testing, but also being able to feel your feelings and figure out, okay, where did this pattern come from? Why go so low when things aren't going your way? How do you pull yourself out? And this goes to what we're talking about through behaviors, thoughts, and emotions. What emotions are sabotaging you right now? How do we allow you to feel your true emotions to live authentically, but then also put a little bit of a boundary around it so that you don't go down rabbit holes? You're able to pull yourself out, get on with your life, and start to do concerted things, concerted action that's inspired by your greater good and the way that you want your life to be, and not necessarily by the failures of the past.
If my fiance was in the room right now, she'd be cheering you on. She'd be like, yeah, that's right. Don't go down the rabbit hole of negative emotion.
You and so many other people, you and I, and it's a human thing. Stoic philosophy has some really, really good stuff around limiting emotions. I feel like that's a good space. Ryan Holiday has some great books on that.
Fantastic. Yeah, I like Ryan's work a lot, actually. And I'm attracted to the Stoics. I just haven't done a deep enough dive, but I do death meditation in the morning, which I think is a really interesting practice. Um, Stepping into a little bit more about you is, um, what is the dream today? You're someone who has, for all things considered, achieved a lot of external successes, and you've worked with a lot of amazing people. When you wake up in the morning and you're like, my current dream that's driving me is, I'd love to know what that is and how that potentially plays out with the Spirituality and Mental Health Center as well.
Definitely. So my dream has changed. I used to have a very concrete dream. A, B, C, D, this is what I want. I want to achieve this, 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 and this. I've changed that because almost like I've been getting my own downloads and messages from the universe that, sure, come up with a plan. Here's your plan. Oh, yeah, that's not what my plan is for you. The universe has other plans for me. And so that has happened enough that I have completely thrown away my plan. And my plan every single day is the best possible life I could have with the most amazing, creative people doing incredible things to improve human consciousness and help the world. And work that is creative and meaningful, being able to be of service, being able to help, and just to be able to feel a lot of joy every day. And I find that when I have that as my greater goal, the other things come in when they're supposed to, as they're supposed to. The right people come in to collaborate with and to guide me. And I don't have the ups and downs of I lived according to this goal or I didn't. But I'm also, to be clear, I have had goals for the majority of my life. And it's only recently that I've taken the shift because I really feel like that's what's being asked of me through the messages that I've got, my own synchronicities in life. It's, I have a plan. That plan doesn't happen, but something much more interesting happens. And I start living a much more interesting life than I anticipated. So that's been sort of my thing, to just go and to be asked to be used by the universe in whatever way that I can to help as many people as I can. That's how this Yale Center was born, essentially. So to give you, you know, how the Yale Center came into being, my book Fulfilled was published 5 years ago. And at the time, I was not on 6 years ago now, at 2017. I was not on faculty. I had gone to Yale Medical School, but had a private practice, very busy practice. I was doing that full time. I started presenting my book in many venues, including universities, and I went back to Yale Medical School to present my book there. And at that time, I was asked to come on the clinical faculty, and I was thrilled. I loved Yale. I had such a great experience there. And that's when I started speaking with at the time, Associate Chair of Psychiatry, Bob Rohrbach, about starting this center. And Bob was excited about a spiritual and mental health center at Yale. No one had done it before, so I knocked on a few doors, and it was clear to me that this was not the time, and Yale was not ready. The world wasn't ready. I wasn't ready. It just was not the right time. And in part, that was because the psychiatry department at Yale is a very neurobiologically focused department. And to bring in spirituality as a priority, it just wasn't really up on the priorities list. So I put it aside, continued to live my life. I started following the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza, a meditation expert, and I started going to some of his retreats. And I'm sitting in one of his retreats during a meditation, and I get a very clear message. This is about 6 to 8 months ago. The time for the Yale Center is now, and Dr. Joe can be one of your partners. And I'm like, that's interesting. So then I backtrack, and all the doors that I knocked on when I first started this process 5 years ago, I knock on them again. And this time, miraculously, the doors swing wide open. The chair of psychiatry is super excited about this idea, calls a meeting with some of the other top psychiatrists. This is very important. Please support, Dr. Yusim in this. And Christopher Pittenger, who's a neurobiology researcher, he did his PhD with Eric Kandel, the only living Nobel Prize winner in psychiatry at Columbia. So he's also head of the psychedelics program at Yale. So he gets interested in this idea and comes on to co-lead the center with me. So here I have one of the most, like a tenured, amazing faculty at Yale co-leading the center. And we're in the process of raising funds, et cetera. And so what happened in between these 5 years? What happened is that psychedelics enter the picture. And this idea of the spirituality of mental health, I believe, was brought into public consciousness through psychedelics. And whereas nobody was ready before, now the world was ready and it was time for the center. And this was, and this is how I feel like my life is going now. Like I have these ideas but I don't know when the time is right. I don't know who I'm going to be doing this or how, but that's really what like all aspects of my life have been lately. And even meeting you at Summit, that wasn't going to happen. And then one of my dear friends is like, Anna, called me up. You need to go to this thing called Summit. I'm like, what Summit? I don't know, but you need to go. And so I went, and it ended up like the house I'm staying in right now is through a Summit friend. What you and I are doing is Summit friends. I feel like my world has become populated with these amazing people from Summit. So it's just day to day. So that's I wake up every morning. That's my goal, to have the best day possible with the most amazing people so that I feel alive, fulfilled, enriched, and creative.
Sounds like you're nailing it. That is, I think, the ultimate desire is to come into that presence. I think that's what I'm starting to feel bubble up is, can I be in that level of presence to know that I can follow the joy throughout the day? I could follow the opportunities and follow the flow. And I'm inspired by hearing your story. I'm quite curious to know, at whatever point in the future, what is what is the goal of the center where you say we did it? Like we did it and it achieved what I
Yeah.
hoped and it set out to achieve.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the goal of the center is threefold. And we are right now, the center is housed within psychiatry, but we're hoping that this is going to be a collaboration between the Yale Divinity School and the Yale Medical School. And we're working to create that center at the, interface. And the goal of the center is threefold. So teaching, clinical work, and research on the interface of mental health and spirituality, which includes a whole bunch of questions and a whole bunch of things. Psychedelic medicine is going to be a part of that, specifically the spiritual side of psychedelic use, but also what kind of spiritual beliefs and practices are consistent with greater mental health or improvement in your depression, anxiety, OCD, PTSD, etc. We're going to be exploring the fine line between being psychic and being psychotic. We're going to be looking at
Interesting.
the way in which spiritual beliefs can help shape people's identity and what impact that has on mental health. We're going to be looking at the two places I mentioned before, addiction and palliative care, and how spirituality being present within those, within the medical structure, changes outcomes. And it has been shown, for instance, that the greatest predictor of an enlightenment experience in alcoholism, like really being able to shift and become enlightened, is being open to God, being able to surrender that. AA is full of those stories. But we also know many people who've gone to AA who have to relapse several times before they get to the place where they're ready, where they're truly ready to give up their addiction. So those are just a few of those things. I'm wearing a new hat that I don't usually
Wow.
wear, and I'm wearing a fundraiser hat. I'm a doctor, speaker, author, psychiatrist, executive coach. I've never been a fundraiser. So this is what I'm doing. I'm getting very comfortable with that and excited about this new role. And of course, bringing in the support that I need in order to help make this happen at Yale.
That's phenomenal. Yeah, there's definitely some people I'd love to connect you with, and I think kind of bringing it to a close for me is that I'm overwhelmed by the idea that I've spent most of my adult life looking for hacks and tools and ways to try to make myself feel good, all these externalities, and to think that even for high achievers, that the answer wasn't so much like learn how to hack your email inbox, but more learn how to fit spirituality into your life. It is something that there's so much dissonance and so much opportunity in pursuing that for myself and I think for many other people. So I think it's beautiful and I'm really inspired by the work you're doing. I'm grateful to know you and be able to follow to see how these things um, hopefully open doors to these answers of again people that have everything externally looking for that thing inside, realizing that hey, maybe this is the stuff that's been around for thousands and thousands of years that we've read in different books and texts that we've rejected in many different ways because we thought we were beyond those things. So I again I just appreciate that, and just a couple of invitations for the listeners is uh, check out Anna's book, Fulfilled: How the Science of Spirituality Can Help You Live a Happier, More Meaningful Life. If anyone's interested in donating, I mean, this sounds like just such an important cause and such a critical time in our experience as humans to find ways to support those that are, I mean, just the epidemic of mental health and anxiety and stress and depression. It just seems like a really important time to be solving this. And again, if you're an executive or someone who's looking for private coaching sessions with Anna, you could check out her website, annayusim.com. And Anna, just again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Nick. I loved hearing your story. And thank you for being so open about your own journey, your own plight, and just the very human things that you've gone through. I'm sure so many people listening can so relate to that. And it was a pleasure to be able to relate to you on that level. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you again.